Today we're going to talk about Mary McLeod Bethune, who was an influential activist for civil rights in the United States during the late 19th century and early 20th century. This podcast was created by Skyler Sanchez and Nattie Teegarden. Mary McLeod Bethune was a civil rights activist and philanthropist with a passion for educating girls for leadership in their community. She was born in 1875 in Maysville, South Carolina, as the 15th of 17 children in her family. Bethune was the first person in her family to be born free from slavery and was also the first to be able to afford a formal education. Unfortunately, throughout her childhood, she had to balance her education with working in the cotton fields to help support her family.
In 1886, Bethune enrolled at a boarding school in North Carolina called Scotia Seminary School, and later attended Dwight L. Moody's Institute for Home and Foreign Missions in Chicago, Illinois, with the hopes of becoming a missionary in Africa. Unfortunately, churches at this time only sent white missionaries abroad. Her professional career began with her teaching at Haynes Normal and Industrial Institute in Augusta, Georgia.
Bethune married her husband, Albertus Bethune, in 1898 and became a mother to her son, Albert Bethune, within a year. After moving to Daytona, Florida, she opened a boarding school called the Daytona Beach Literacy and Industrial School for Training Negro Girls on October 3, 1904. It began with only 5 students enrolled, but over the next 2 years it grew to over 250 students. This school later became a college and merged with the all-male Cookman Institute in 1923 to become Bethune-Cookman College. The school now enrolls over 4,000 students and is a fully accredited 4-year university in Daytona Beach, Florida.
The Daytona Beach Literacy and Industrial School for Training Negro Girls added a nursing program with the hopes of opening its own hospital after Bethune realized that there were no hospitals in the area that would treat Black people. This effort succeeded when in 1911 Bethune opened the first Black hospital in Daytona. It started with only 2 beds, but after a few years, the hospital had grown to 20 beds. This hospital assisted with medical care during the 1918 influenza outbreak, during which time the hospital became so full they had to expand into the school auditorium. Throughout the 20 years the hospital was open, it helped many Black Americans who would have otherwise received no medical care.
Bethune's work didn't end with opening the college and hospital, though. After women gained the right to vote in 1920, she led many voter registration drives and founded organizations with the goal of racial and gender equality. She was elected president of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs in 1924, and President Coolidge, impressed with her involvement in political advocacy, invited her to attend the Child Welfare Conference in 1928. 2 years later, President Hoover appointed her to attend a conference on child health at the White House. 10 years later, she became the founding president of the National Council of Negro Women.
In 1936, President Roosevelt gave Bethune the title of Director of Negro Affairs of the National Youth Administration, which made her the highest-ranking African-American woman in government. She was also the highest-paid African-American person in the government with a salary of $5,000. She organized a conference that focused on the problems of the Negro and Negro youth and fought to end discrimination and lynching.
In 1938, Bethune co-founded the Southern Conference on Human Welfare. This was an organization which sought to promote New Deal-type reforms in the South regarding social justice, civil rights, and electoral reform. The following year, she participated in a picket line in Washington, D.C. that was sparked when a local drugstore refused to hire Black employees. On November 23, 1939, Bethune spoke on a panel for NBC Radio's weekly public affairs broadcast called America's Town Meeting of the Air. The panel was titled, "This is what American Democracy Means to Me," and this was her answer.
Perhaps the greatest battle is before us. The fight for a new America, fearless, free, united, morally rearmed, in which 12 million Negroes shoulder to shoulder with their fellow Americans, will strive that this nation under God will have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, for the people, and by the people shall not perish from the earth. This dream, this idea, this aspiration, this is what American democracy means to me.
She became the vice president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Persons in 1940 and held this position for the rest of her life. 3 years into holding this position, she stepped down from her duties at Bethune-Cookman College because of her commitments in Washington, D.C. She then spent the next few years living in the National Council of Negro Women headquarters in Washington, D.C.
In 1942, Bethune accepted a position as the Special Assistant to the Secretary of War for selection of the candidates for the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. In 1943, Bethune was named an Honorary General of the Women's Army for National Defense due to her work as an advisor for the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps and the Women's Army for National Defense. Bethune advocated for the rights of Black women in the armed forces, including the knowledge, skill, and special training of the nation. Over the course of World War II, Bethune's persistence allowed something like 6,500 African American women to serve in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps.
Bethune's influence was amplified when she attended the founding conference of the United Nations in 1945 and was the only woman of color in attendance. This conference was the very beginning of the United Nations, in which delegates of 50 nations gathered in one place to discuss global peace and security issues and achieve international cooperation.
Due to her work with the National Council of Negro Women, who supported the Haitian women's movement throughout the 1940s, Bethune was invited to Haiti to receive the National Order of Honor and Merit Award. This is the highest Haitian civilian honor, and Bethune was the first woman to receive this award.
2 years later, in 1951, Bethune served in President Truman's Committee of 12 for National Defense. This committee was created to investigate and correct problems related to U.S. war production with waste, inefficiency, and war profiteering. In 1952, she also received the Star of Africa Award in Liberia, while traveling as an official U.S. representative.
During this same year, the Board of Education in Englewood, New Jersey, canceled her engagement to speak in a public school because the House Committee on Un-American Activities branded her as a communist due to the current Red Scare. Luckily, due to public support, she was eventually able to speak at a nearby church where she denied the charge of communism. During this talk, she urged African Americans to fight for their rights.
In 1953, Bethune established the Mary McLeod Bethune Foundation, which was a nonprofit organization that aimed to promote her social and educational ideals. Her home, where this foundation is located, was designated as a National Historical Landmark on December 2, 1974, and is currently open to the public as an educational artifact.
Although Bethune died of a heart attack in 1955, she has not been forgotten. In 1973, Mary McLeod Bethune was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame, and 1 year later, a monument in her honor was unveiled to a crowd of 18,000 people in Lincoln Park, Washington, D.C. Multiple statues around the country have been unveiled in the years following her death, including one which made history in 2021 as the first state-commissioned statue at the U.S. Capitol to be of a Black person. As we reflect on the life and work of Mary McLeod Bethune, it is clear that her legacy is not simply a chapter in a history textbook. She left behind a beacon of hope for future generations to come. Her unwavering commitment to justice, equality, and dignity for all reminds us that the fight for civil rights is not a momentary struggle or an issue of the past, but rather a continuous journey towards a more inclusive and compassionate society. I'd like to end this podcast with a final message from Mary McLeod Bethune. I leave you love. I leave you hope. I leave you the challenge of developing confidence in one another. I leave you a thirst for education. I leave you a respect for the use of power. I leave you faith. I leave you racial dignity. I leave you a desire to live harmoniously with your fellow men. I leave you, finally, a responsibility to our young people.